I was really impressed with how dedicated these guys were to the cause. I mean, they were cool dudes, they were kind of guys that you could be inspired by. So it was meeting those guys that actually got me interested in it from the energy analysis side. And the blower door was just kind of like a tool that kind of got you there. So I started working in the garage, which is where we were building these things, and then slowly changing it bit by bit by bit. I think we had, I don't know, something like 10 models before we came up with the one that we have now. So, I mean, I started as a manufacturer not knowing anything except the fact that I spent my youth building model airplanes.
Welcome to the Flow Lab, the podcast where we dive deep into the science of building performance and HVAC innovations. Today we bring you another insightful episode aimed to enhance your knowledge and expertise in the field. Joining us are your co-hosts, Ben Walker, co-CEO of RetroTec, and Sam Myers, a renowned building science specialist and RetroTec trainer. Together, they bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to ensure our discussions are both informative and engaging. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to enter the Flow Lab, where we'll explore the world of building performance. Let's get started.
Yeah, welcome to the Flow Lab podcast. I'm Ben Walker, and this is Sam Myers.
Hello.
And today's episode, we have the founder of RetroTec, Colin Genge, on the podcast. He was actually the first person I ever spoke to in the building science world. He hired me from a classified ad in the Bellingham Herald in 1995 for a network engineer. So great to have him on. He's been retired for a few years. He just moved back to New Zealand. So it was really nice to get a chance to kind of catch up with him and see what he's been up to.
I came on to RetroTec kind of right after Collin retired, but I have been fortunate enough to meet him and talk with him quite a bit since then. And he's just a super innovative person. I don't think anybody else out there thinks the way that he does.
Super innovative, yeah.
Yeah, it's excited to kind of get his take on things, on how, this industry began and started up, and, why things kind of shifted in the direction that it did, and just kind of hearing, maybe what he would do differently if he could go back.
The history too about, another one of those companies that, started out in the garage. And then,
all the good ones did.
Real company, yeah, exactly. So, really cool to see, get a chance to catch up with him and see what he's been up to. We'll crank it up here. Here's the episode. Well, I appreciate you taking the time and, joining on us on our initial podcast episode. This is, you're our guinea pig.
Okay. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts since I got here, about 600 in total. So I do a lot of podcasts.
Maybe you should be asking us the questions then.
Have you ever been a guest on any?
The only one that was podcast-like was the one that I did for, it's still online. If you do a search on me, you find it. But that's really the only kind of podcast-like thing I've done.
Well, I figured the questions are, we don't have to be, married to this the way that it is. We just kind of put it together as a guide just to kind of keep us going and just kind of keep the conversation kind of flowing and natural. But really just wanted you to be able to tell your story. Like Ben said, there's still quite a few people that we run into at trade shows and conferences that ask about you, and there's really no videos or anything recent.
Hopefully they're not people that owe money to.
Since you retired and whatnot, then, and I know that you moved to New Zealand probably just before COVID, I think, right? And then, so what have you been up to since then?
I went through 2 weeks of...
As quarantine or...
Quarantine, yeah. So what I've been up to mostly is focusing on getting in shape. Sitting at a desk for 30 years is not the best thing for a person's physical condition. So I hike about, 30K a week. I just stay active, eat well, and freedom from stress, all that kind of stuff. So I'm probably as healthy as I've been in 10 years.
You still reading like Popular Mechanics and Popular Science and all those magazines, and still reading a lot of articles and stuff related to building science stuff, or just kind of stepped away from some of that stuff?
I still follow, I get Scientific American, and I follow it religiously. I think I've had a subscription now for about 40 years. So I get most of my stuff on YouTube online, either podcasts and so on. Lex Friedman's podcast alone, you got about every smart guy that ever walked the planet's been on his. But as far as staying up on building science, I've kind of graduated more to renewable energy. So that's one of the things I follow very closely is renewable energy, electrification. Does it make sense to put in solar panels, wind, battery storage, and so on? And here in Auckland, it only makes sense to buy a battery because you can get free power at night. So you just, why put solar panels on the roof when you can get power at night, right, for free? So you just charge up your panel or your battery during the night and then use the power during the day.
I like the Lex Friedman podcast myself too. I feel like I should have been maybe dressed up with the suit and tie now for this one. But you guys probably see right through that though. So
Probably, yeah.
Might be a little worried about you. You'd be too much out of character.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we were kind of curious, like what, when was the first time that you kind of saw or was exposed to the blower door in general? Like when, was it just you saw the fan and somebody already had built one, or you and the others had kind of put one together yourselves, or how did it kind of start?
Well, I met Brendan Reed at a solar energy conference, and I walked out and I went, oh, this solar energy doesn't make any sense. This was in 1980, where bear in mind, solar energy was 75 times more expensive than it is now. I'm going, this is like totally ridiculous. So I walked up to Brendan Reed, who was going out with one of the women that lived in my co-op. I said, this doesn't make any sense. What do you think of it? He said, oh, you should see what we're doing. So they had gotten plans to build a Princeton blower door from Princeton University. And I went over there, and they had kind of made a few changes and kind of improved it a bit. They've taken the plywood, they used aluminum foam sandwich stuff and so on, but basically just a copy of the plywood one that Princeton University made, kind of dressed it up a little bit. But the interesting thing wasn't so much the blower door, which we call door fans, which kind of shook and made a lot of noise and, seemed kind of a bit, out there. Interesting stuff was the fact that they were working on an energy analysis program that would analyze where all the energy in the house was going and what retrofit opportunities would prevent it from going there, and what the return on investment of all those different aspects would be. So we quickly discovered that reinsulating the hot water tank, setback thermostats were the two biggies that were always had good paybacks of about 6 months. And the next one was air sealing, which was about, say, usually a 1-year payback. And the rest of it was like far, far down the list. And things like windows and doors that people like to replace are like 50 years, and they're still there, So we did that whole energy analysis program on a Sharp calculator with 16K, not meg, 16K.
Oh, man.
Colin, about what year was this when?
1980.
Okay.
So what really impressed me was how dedicated the engineers that were working on this were to the idea of energy conservation. And having been in engineering and not been particularly inspired by their kind of awareness, like global awareness and so on, I was really impressed with how dedicated these guys were to the cause. I mean, they were cool dudes, they were kind of guys that you could be inspired by. So it was meeting those guys that actually got me interested in it from the energy analysis side, and the blower door was just kind of like a tool that kind of got you there. So I started working in the garage, which is where we were building these things, and then slowly changing it bit by bit by bit. I think we had, something like 10 models before we came up with the one that we have now. So, I started as a manufacturer not knowing anything except the fact that I spent my youth building model airplanes, and then kind of generally farting around building stuff and so forth, and also working on building boats. It was that expertise that allowed me to at least be curious enough about manufacturing to try different techniques. And our first production type methodology was called RIM, reaction injection molding, which is what they make keyboards out of, that kind of foamy type stuff, like a skin on the outside and kind of foamy on the inside. And so we made our first panels out of that material. We probably still have some of them floating around.
I believe so, yeah. In the museum here, I think they're.
Yeah.
I feel like every good company has a garage origin story.
All the good ones, Amazon, Apple, yeah.
Yeah, they all started in garage.
So initially it was more focused on the energy conservation side more than the comfort side.
The business that we were doing at the time was called Retrospectors. That was like retrofit inspector.
Okay.
We were inspecting houses to see what could be fixed to make them better. And we essentially built our own blower door to run that service, thinking, everyone's going to want this, right? So it was a main thrust of all of RetroTech's activities was not to build blower doors, but to run a service to RetroTech is retrofit, comes from retrofit, to retrofit different houses using technology, retrofit technology, RetroTech.
Yeah, nice.
That's awesome.
It's good to really have an understanding of where the name came from, too, because you do get that question occasionally.
Yeah, that's a common question.
Yeah.
It's kind of a hard name to say, you know?
Everyone wants to put an H at the end of it.
Yeah, or hyphenate it. Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, right there at the end of the energy crisis of the 70s, I mean, was there any kind of like government programs or like funding from like the federal government at that time, or was it just before all that happened?
The main funding in the US were community action programs where, and they probably still have them to this day,
Like weatherization programs?
they would go into the houses of poor people who couldn't afford to heat their homes and reduce their energy consumption by these low cost, no cost things, which is where, say, our competitors started, because what they would do is they would run a state program and they'd get like 50 blower doors or something. If your bid was $50 low, then you lost that order. So they all focused on the low cost market. But we said, to hell with that. We're going to go for something va-va-voom that looks really cool. So we've always gone for the appearance aspect, because we had to go into the home and sell the homeowner as opposed to someone getting a handout. Like, that's kind of where we started, was in the open market, I guess, free market, as opposed to the government assistance program. And then shortly after that, or at the same time, Canada came up with its R2000 program, which was the basis for the Passive House program. So Passive House is R2000 on steroids. So R2000 came out with, I think, 1.5 air changes per hour at 50 pascals versus 0.6 for Passive House. So that was kind of like the beginning of performance housing. So, you know, they would come up with like design details for how to wrap headers and how to seal attics and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of like the beginning of high performance building, was R2000, which actually never really went anywhere. But what came out of it was, in about 2000, 1990 something, is the UK came to Canada and they said, hey, we want to put together a performance building program. What do you say? And so what they did is they took a bunch of guys from CMHC, some guys from NRC. They went to the UK for a week. They designed a program, and they're still running with it 25 years later. They just, you know, like, what should we do? Let's do this. Boom. They started out with houses, and then they eventually went to high-rise buildings as well. And so they're the only country that just, like, at the, you know, kind of a flip of a hat, just all of a sudden just went into, okay, let's just do it.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like here in the States, we have this pattern of, all right, here's all this funding, and then it dries up in a couple of years, and then there's a need for it again, and then it pops up again, and it's like, oh, here's all this funding again, and it's like, we haven't really learned our lesson yet, but hopefully we're going to develop some better patterns here as this becomes a little bit more mainstream.
What they would do in the U.S., which is kind of interesting, is every state would kind of get online with this state energy conservation program, and they would all start asking the same fundamental questions about natural air change and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, look, all the stuff is all figured out. Just look at all the CMHC documentation. We've known all this shit for over a decade. Just read all the stuff. Oh, no. We want to do all of our research because we're getting paid to do research. Every state went through the same loop, and a lot of them hired the same consultants to redo the same shit that we knew already, because that's what they got funded for.
It's unfortunate. It makes sense, but it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
How long before you moved the manufacturing to Bellingham in the States and moved to White Rock? What made you decide to make the move and to move the manufacturing down to the States? And how many blower doors did you guys manufacture in Canada before you did so?
Probably like maybe 100 or so in Canada, not very many. But we went from Ottawa, and we decided, in order to promote our home energy retrofit program, where we do this whole energy analysis thing, we needed to be in a central location, which was Indianapolis. So what we did is we rented a 30,000 square foot facility in Indianapolis, and we built a house inside it, and we brought people in to train them on how to retrofit houses. And the program was going gangbusters. We had the local utility on board who wanted to install heat pumps after blowing something like $3 billion on nuclear reactors that they canceled. And they had egg on their face. So they said, oh, what we're going to do is we're going to put in ground source heat pumps, because there's lots of water in the ground in Indianapolis. So they had this heat pump program. But the thing is, the heat pump that they would install, maybe $15,000, $20,000. So what we did is we showed them how to reduce the energy requirement of the house down, so they only had to put in a say a $7,000 heat pump. The way the program was lined up is the utility would fund the heat pump so that they would work it out so that they were saving money every single month and that the homeowner was money ahead. All they had to do is just say yes. It was just like the best program ever. And then the Attorney General of Indianapolis stepped in and said that we were essentially practicing medicine without a license because we were finding radon in their houses. And they got on TV and they said, we're going to stop this RetroTech. We're going to put them all in jail. And we went, what?
That's no good.
And they did. They basically kicked us out of town.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And then so the utility, who was like, they just loved us because we were making the program work. Because what they would do is they would put the advertising brochure in with the bill. And they basically was like, it was our dream come true, right? And they said, sorry about that. The Attorney General's after you, even though, like, we know you guys are cool, but there's no way we can fight these guys. We're going to have to wait for this to blow over, which is like, boom.
Oh, no.
Our legs were cut out from underneath us. We were left completely penniless. And then we hired this accountant who was like a really big believer in RetroTech. And I said to Brendan, I said, I don't like the sound of this guy. And he said, oh, what's the worst thing that could happen? So 3 months later, we found out what the worst thing could happen was that when I went back to the warehouse, which was cleaned out, all of our computer equipment was gone. He'd emptied the bank account.
Oh, man.
And that was the end of that. So at that point, he said, I wouldn't blame you if you went back to Vancouver and worked with Sebastian. And I started working with Sebastian Moffat. At that point, we had just gotten approval to sit down with NFPA to write a standard for enclosure integrity testing. So I went to Boston, and over a weekend, we wrote the NFPA standard for testing enclosures, and that became our business opportunity. So we could, like within, say, a 2-year period, as much stuff as we could make, we could sell. And we just had stuff pumping out the door left, right, and center. So only after that period did we decide to go back into, well, we're making this stuff anyway, because we've advanced our technology. Let's start selling this back into the energy market. And that's when Brendan picked up on the idea of creating this company whose purpose it was to essentially sell a franchise to show people how to do energy retrofit in houses. So he took the energy retrofit part of the business. I took the blower manufacturing part of the business. We went our own separate ways. RetroTech, as you know, continued on. That's kind of where we got to where we are now.
How did the whole idea of enclosure integrity come about? Did the NFPA approach you and ask for something, or is it something that you guys just figured out you could put together an offer?
Well, interestingly, it happened because there was a Canadian Forces base that kept failing the discharge test. So what they do is they put this gaseous suppression system in, they discharge it, then they measure the concentration, and the stuff kept running out. So they did this 3 times, and they blew like maybe $20,000 worth of halon into this enclosure. And this engineer, Gary Taylor, said, well, you know, I had these guys come by with this blower door to test my house in Toronto. Maybe that will show me where the leaks are because the stuff is heavier than air. So I get this contractor who's testing houses in New Brunswick or something. I know it hasn't got a clue about clean agent or anything else. And he's telling me this stuff. It's just mumbo jumbo. I get on the phone with Gary Taylor, ask him about it. I sit down, I read the NFPA standard, and I go, shit, this stuff is heavier than air. Heavier than air means it's got negative stack. It falls out the bottom, just like with the energy conservation program we've been working on. With lighter than air, rises out, and it's like the stack pressures are about the same. You know, they're in the same order of magnitude. So I said, well, let's just apply the same math to this heavier than air agent leaking out the bottom, and let's create an algorithm that will allow them to test the enclosures without having to do a discharge test, which is essentially how the thing happened.
That's cool. So it just happened by chance that this engineer had a blower door test done on his house and figured, why can't we do this here? That's cool.
Pure shithouse luck. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's amazing how it works out that way sometimes.
And he said, you guys are probably going to sell $1 million worth of blower doors. Well, into that market, we probably sold quite a bit more than that.
But you were still making them out of Vancouver then? Like when you were still working with Sebastian and stuff? Or like you'd moved the operation down to Bellingham by then? Or
we started making them in Vancouver, and we had a rental premises that was a little tight. So I thought, the thing is, we'll probably never make any money selling blower doors, but if I bought a piece of property, I might make money on that. So I tried to buy property in Vancouver, which would be $250,000, but I was able to find one in Bellingham for 65. And I went, hey, this is the place to be, right?
Yeah, nice. Okay.
I did it because I could not afford to buy a place in Vancouver, but I could afford the place in Bellingham. And that's when you started working for me at this place over on Queen Street.
Like 1995, I remember.
When Ben was a young guy with, how long was your hair, down to your waist or so?
There's still a couple of pictures floating on the W drive around here that I'm still trying to track down and remove. So.
Oh, man. Shouldn't have told me that.
And now people are always amazed that, for this position now or whatever, but how it started, I would say, I just answered this classified ad in the Bellingham Herald for a network engineer, a network computer specialist or whatnot. And that's how we met, and that's how we became involved. But seems like forever ago now, but I still recall that first phone call with you, as vividly as yesterday, really.
Let me put it this way. I've got 3 computers in my bedroom, and I'm networking them all day long. So anything you got, I can handle. Okay. I think that's pretty much what you said.
That's pretty much what. Yeah. So you asked me like, what's my experience? And I say, I have 3 computers at my house networked together. I use them every day. So debating to go with Microsoft Network and Novell, and you chose Microsoft, and, maybe we actually should have gone with Novell. I don't know.
No, it was Apple, wasn't it? We were looking at going with an Apple system.
Yeah, it was Novell. It was it's still PC based.
Okay.
But the backbone was a different kind of networking structure. But yeah, back in those days, the mid 90s, how many systems do you think we sold per month back then? Really, it was
we were selling 25, 30 systems a month.
Yeah. Okay.
Somewhere in there, as many as we could make, we could sell.
And that's when you had the red suitcase and the Magna-Helic gauges, and then the HP 200LXs were kind of the computer. You moved on from the Sharps and moved on to the HP 200LXs and doing all the calculations with those computers and whatnot back then, I think.
When we went to the printers and so forth, the printers were actually designed for the energy conservation business for the home retrofits. So you go into the home, you do a test, this thing would spit out the analysis. That was why we did that. So we had an HP 95 on this console with a little printer, 8.5 by 11 printer in the back. That was the purpose. That there wasn't really needed for the enclosure integrity market, but the enclosure integrity market, there was enough money in it that we could basically sell them. I think the systems that we sold, the standard package was $8,000. That's what $79.90, and everybody bought the same thing.
Okay, yeah,
wow.
The number of staff back then too is probably just close to 8 or 10 or something like that at the facility. I think back then
in Vancouver we had 4 or 5 people working. And then when we went down to Bellingham, I think we started with 3 or 4, and then we bought the unit next door, and then doubled that and bought the one unit over. So I guess we probably got up to about maybe 25 or 30 at one point.
Yeah, okay. Not too bad, yeah.
Duct testing is still a really hot product of ours that we push. I mean, especially here in the Southeast, we're still putting ductwork outside of the building enclosure, and so duct testing is just getting more and more popular. How did you first start manufacturing duct testers? How did that story come up?
The first duct tester was actually a CMHC project. So CMHC, in case you don't know, is kind of like the premier building science research group that did a lot of the kind of breakthrough building science, starting in the late 70s and so on, and early 80s and so forth. They put out a contract for what they call the duct test rig, that was designed to test ducts and to test flues and to test anything smaller than a house. And the thing was, about this big, about 1.5 foot square kind of thing. It was kind of overly complicated with a bunch of servos and a bunch of kind of rotating orifices and so forth. I worked on that with Shelter Scientific. And I remember at this trade show, one of our competitors came up and they went, "Oh, this is interesting." And then learned all about it. And then before we knew it, they were making them. So we were a little bit late to the party. So we eventually caught up and went through the usual 4 or 5 models till we kind of arrived at the one that we have right now.
I met with an HVAC contractor here in Wilmington a couple of years ago, and we just bought this small company and they have one of your duct testers, and he pulled it out and it was a DU100.
Oh, well.
That was one of the first ones. That Magna-Helic,
I was like, whoa. That was the first one of those I've ever seen.
The square box made out of Corex.
Yeah, had the sliding panel on it to adjust hole size. So,
oh man,
yeah. And of course, there was some homemade stuff added on up to fix stuff that broke over the years. But
Yeah, I was really surprised that that's what they had.
We stuck with MagnaHelix for a long time. I think that I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon when it comes to technology. And, Ben was the one who actually designed the first DM1 and he said, look, I got this thing working. And we're okay with, like, people want a big round gauge, okay? I'm a little bit late to the party when it came to going digital. I was late to the party when it came to like computerized testing because we could put this on a log scale and plot the points, and that's like real engineering, which actually has some advantage that you can. I mean, there's still some of our customers that do this to this day. They want to like they want to plot the data points.
Yeah.
The old style slide rule engineers. Eventually, Ben pushed us into the digital age.
Ben Bogey is a home builder friend of ours in Massachusetts, and he posted on social media, I think yesterday or the day before, of all of his RetroTech gauges, and he still has his DM1. And I think he said the buttons still glow in the dark.
It always dates me though. I see like the whole transition of the gauges like back to the DM1, and I was like, oh man, look at all this gray hair. And
I should just wait for your questions and not be kind of proffering up items from your list.
This is great. I mean, the whole point of this is just to kind of hear your story of, how it all began and why, and just kind of, to see how it got to where it is today.
I'm good to kind of intercept your questions because, that way you'll ask questions in kind of a flow of consciousness as opposed to whatever is going on in my head, which might not be all that good.
Like the level of continuity.
We were talking about duct testing. I mean, the commercial duct tester is still a really hot product of ours. It's still the only thing like it on the market. How did you wander into that?
I recall going around to the shows and talking to every single manufacturer. All I wanted to do is just sell them our gauge. Look, we got this gauge. We can put your flow result on. No. We want to continue to screw it. If we have the gauge, we've got like a good chunk of what is needed because the rest is just a fan, which we have, an orifice plate, which we have, and so forth. So the rest of it's pretty easy. So then I thought, well, what's wrong with these things? Well, they're too heavy and clunky. There was one, I think, the TSI unit that was, I don't know, $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 or so. It was slightly smaller. That's where I got the idea to go like super small. It was only by virtue of the fact that I was able to convince the president of the Duct Testing Association to buy one of ours. He was this French guy. And when I was at the trade show, he would literally go up to every single person like that he knew there and drag them over to our booth. He said, look, you got to look at this. You got to get one. He bought one, and then he immediately changed all of his duct testing to our duct tester because the guy could just like walk up the stairs, the thing in his hand, throw it in the back seat, and away he went. That was kind of the start. So I would give him credit for actually getting us in the door because people don't like to change. They think their paradigm is it's got to be on a cart. It's got to weigh 150 pounds. It's got to have a big blower. That's what a duct tester looks like, right? It doesn't look like some little toy thing, right?
It's definitely caught on. I mean, that same kind of thing happens when we go to these trade shows. Like somebody that hasn't seen it before will come up and look at it, and then somebody else will come up and say, oh yeah, we have that. It's awesome.
How many of them do you guys sell?
A lot. Darren was just sharing the numbers with me earlier today, and it's like it's just doubled over even the past couple of years even. So I'm still on a great trajectory. Yeah. It's surprising actually because like a lot of people here didn't really think that there was that significant of a market for it and stuff, but definitely proved us wrong there. And then Phil Emery always reminds me that he was the one that told you to do this or whatever. So I just have to make sure we say that so that if he's listening to this, that he at least got a shout out.
I'm sorry, Phil Emery told us to do what?
He told me that he's the one that spoke to you at one of the regional NEB shows or something like that and convinced you to do the commercial duct tester, I think. But
he might have. He might have. I couldn't testify that he didn't. So,
but he's also one of those guys still using a MagnaHelix and a pencil to calculate all the results.
and the log paper, right? And the slave still using the slide rule, probably. So, did he ever buy one of our duct testers?
I believe so. Yeah.
So, how many models do you have? You still have the 400 and the 500, and did you make any more or what?
For the commercial duct testers, it's still the 400 and the 500. And then we have the Model 5000, the Model 6000, the Contrafan, the Model 7000 now run on the DC motor. as far as fans go, and then the Model 300 for residential duct testing.
So when is the 7000 in full production? Are you just like dribbling out a few units or what?
We've been leaking out a few units here and there as we're kind of doing some initial field testing, get some feedback from the field and stuff, and then been making some tweaks. But, we have the production line all ready to go and everything. But, and we feel like we have the last few tweaks kind of underway. It's a lot more involved project than, because we started that when you were still here, so that must have been about 8 or 9 years ago now, at least, or whatever. So
I get a kick out of people trashing Elon Musk for, oh my God, he said the car was going to be ready in 6 months and it was 9 months. It's all fucked up. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, well, lots of projects that we think it's a year, and 10 years later, we still think it's a year.
R&D, as you know, product development is a very rewarding thing to do, but it also is super challenging, and you run into roadblocks that you just could not see coming your way. And you're trying to give the best estimates and timelines that you can, but, that's just with the information you have at hand at the time, whatever. So, every day.
Pandemic didn't help either.
So how are your panel gaps?
They're not bad in my car.
Okay.
And you know how it is too in product development. As soon as you release something, then, feel satisfied and everything, then everyone just tells you what's wrong with it or what needs to be improved or, and like not always positive, but, you try to navigate your way through it.
It's difficult to make anything that's hardware is the same thing is true with software. Software is still kind of crash prone.
It's like, and it's a combination of everything too, right? It's like the design for manufacturing, the plastics, the electronic side, the programming of the firmware that goes into the electronics, the software side, trying to do all this communication standards and everything. And it's a challenging place to be doing R&D. Colin, I remember like the kind of the company's mission statement that you came up with while you were here was less energy, more peace. And I was just curious if, today, considering like kind of the conflicts around the world and everything, like if you felt when you started in the 80s and to where we are now, like, are we in a better place or are we in the same place?
We're probably in a better place because we probably have the solution to the energy problem, or say the fossil fuel problem. The only roadblock we have now is the political block where every government on earth is funded by the fossil fuel industry and conflicted by the fossil fuel industry. When I am online and having discussions about people with renewable energy, I'm hearing the echo of the fossil fuel company's viewpoint about, windmills will do nothing but kill birds. And what about all those blades? Like without recognizing that the average fossil fuel vehicle is putting out almost a pound per mile of pollutants. And that's okay, but let's not put a blade anywhere, that kind of crap. So you hear a lot of this fear, uncertainty, and doubt stuff that's being promoted. So we have the solutions, and certainly conservation was and still is one of the best solutions because it provides you with energy at the cheapest possible cost, not using it in the first place. But there's nothing to sell, right? Unless there's a standard that forces you to build a conserving house. The person buying a new house just assumes it's energy efficient because the real estate agent told them it was, right? End of story, right? It's only when regulations come into effect that the houses have any chance of actually being energy efficient. We have evolved to a point where we have the solution, but haven't evolved to the point politically where we're willing to take it on. We still get people with these kind of frail arguments about, these electric cars, they're running out of electricity all the time, and you can hardly drive out of town. I drive mine out of town every Saturday, every Sunday, all over New Zealand, no problem at all, and you probably do as well.
Yeah.
And you're going to spend 8 hours at the charging station, which you never have. The fossil fuel industry fighting to keep their $4 trillion industry while they do approximately $7 trillion in global climate change damage. But even worse than that, the best case that I've seen for it is that we lose 180,000, or you do, to 350,000 people a year in the U.S., premature deaths due to air pollution. That's equivalent to what you lost during COVID. So it's like a COVID every year, but it's okay because we're used to it, okay? Because we love gasoline, and it's like it's American, and the more we burn, the better. And it's like, let's go for it, right? Which is unfortunate. We could justify it on healthcare cost alone. But that argument is not had, which is unfortunate. So we've got new transportation, which we're getting EVs to the point where they're probably cheaper over the lifetime than a gas car and so forth. That's not counting the healthcare problems, not counting the environmental damage and so forth, just like pure mathematically. We have the solutions at hand. We Think X, which is a really good website. If you guys don't know it, it talks about the different forms of energy and like different areas, geographically benefit from, say, solar, wind, battery storage, that kind of thing. The information is out there, but it's God knows how long it's going to take. It's stunning to me that I started this company in 1980, thinking by 1985 that we would be on board with this stuff. We're still not on board. It's like 45 years later, like we're still paddling upstream.
Well, as you look back, when you started out on 1980, I mean, what were some of your fondest memories, from when you began until now?
My fondest memories, though, I guess in those days the business actually wasn't very complicated. It seemingly I kind of worked like a kind of a almost a normal workday and so forth. It seemed like every year it kind of got more complicated. And there were more things involved. So at one point, we were up to 70 employees. I think you're probably below that right now. There was like levels of complexity that were just over the moon. Over that business in the UK, that was a disaster. Having lawsuits with employees that were stealing our technology and trying to sell it to our competitors.
Yeah, so if you were like to go back and give yourself some advice for when you first started the company or maybe a few years after or whatever, what do you think that would be really?
Don't ever start a company. Just get a good job. I would say for a lot of guys, so become a plumber, become an electrician, get a good rate free work, but be really good at it. And you will have all the work you'll ever want, because most of the trades people are shit. Just get a really good job and then just focus on doing the stuff you want with your life. And they got a really firm, solid, dependable thing. And if you're going to get involved with technology, get involved with some of the disruptive stuff. Like if you are an AI programmer, you can get $1 million starting bonus. That tells you get on board with the new stuff.
What makes you say that, though? Just because of the stress of trying to run your own business and just like it's not worth it? Or
if you consider that most super successful, let's take Amazon, for example. Amazon is a total accidental success. 10 years without making money. Successful because he got money from investors. He threw billions of dollars into it. And then accidentally was successful by having to build data centers and then selling his data center time. That's where he makes his money. So I call that an accident. He doesn't care whether his company makes money, because all he needs to do is sell more stuff, expand the company. Maybe 1 in 100 becomes a Microsoft or becomes an Apple, and the rest of them just go down the drain. But it doesn't matter because, they get their funding from investors who want to invest in the latest and greatest.
So it's just like the odds are just stacked against you or whatever.
If you are getting people to invest in you, then whether you're successful or not, you still make money. So that's one route. The other route, if you're self-financing, if you keep it really small, you're basically selling your labor, that's okay. But once you start getting employees, then you get all these variables that start getting into there. I mean, it was only luck that I managed to get out of RetroTech with anything at all. So up until when I left, I was behind 3 years in my salary. I got credited the salary, paid taxes on it, but never actually got it because the company needed the money. So had I not been able to sell it, I wouldn't have got paid as much as my lowest paid worker for the amount of time I put in. I would say it's just a matter of luck that I managed to get out in the positive. And that's a company that's pretty successful, right? So even if you're successful, doesn't mean you're going to make any money.
Are there any customer stories or anything like that have stuck with you over the years? Certain people that you've worked with, whether if that was at RetroTech or outside of the company in the industry or anything like that?
To be honest, I haven't really thought about that for so long. The one part of it that I remember is I really like getting a call from someone and they know that their problem is unsolvable. I know that their problem is easily solvable.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of putting the two together, getting the person to calm down long enough to convince them that you actually can solve their problem. I used to like doing that. I can't say that I really remember any of the people that used to just call me on a kind of a buddy, except maybe for John in Australia. John and I have got this bromance. I went to stay at his place. I could hardly get out of there. He used to call me. He called me every single day for 2 years when I was here in New Zealand.
He's definitely passionate.
Yeah. John's kind of an over the top kind of guy.
Are you guys using a software at all?
We've been looking at it, actually. Been chatting with him quite a bit about it, really. So, yeah, we hope to do something. He hopes to travel to the States and maybe co-attend a couple conferences with us in 2025, maybe, or something like that, to help promote it and stuff. But it looks really good and just keeps getting better and everything. So look forward to kind of trying to partner up with them on it.
I think there are certain customers, and John would be one on the very top of the list, that are just 100% RetroTech guys.
It's he's fun to keep up with. Some of his employees post a lot on LinkedIn, and just seeing the types of tests that they do. I mean, I think I saw a Model 4000 with a duct on it hooked up, that they were doing an air tightness test with. I'm like, who else does that? So, yeah, they're fun to watch.
I went to a test they did here in Auckland University. They came all the way over from Australia to do it. I think he brought like 6 of his guys or something, and just a shitload of equipment. I was actually impressed with how well organized they were. They would be probably a good person to have as a guest at one of your, commercial. He would definitely be another guy to do a podcast interview with. Say, just take large building testing aside, which would be interesting for that particular group. But he would be a good guy to interview on that. Because he does a shitload of videos.
That was fun. Like, I think it was last year, or maybe the year before, we got to go to Australia to install a calibration facility there, and got the chance to meet John in person and stuff. And he drove us around, and it was a lot of fun, actually.
Are you guys doing a lot of calibrations in Australia?
It's picking up. Yeah, it has over the past year or so. It's starting to pick up. So some of the Atmos stuff going in there and everything. So
do you get any stuff from Southeast Asia, which is like right next door?
Since it all goes direct there, then I don't really get to see where it's coming from and stuff. But I just see the number of calibrations performed over a certain period of time or something like that. It seems like it's picking up. So it saves a lot of time for transporting fans back and forth between, obviously, Asia and to the States and stuff.
So you got one calibration in Australia, one in Holland. Do you have any more?
Not at the moment. No, that's it right now. It seems to be serving the industry pretty well. And if need be, we can look at some other areas as well. Everyone wants to put one in until they find out how much it costs. And then to do a ride and to meet the standards and everything, it's a little bit of expensive endeavor. Yeah.
I remember like looking at companies that made those things, and even one that's like half the flow rate of yours or less was a massive amount of money.
Yeah, the calibration room in Everson is always a hit whenever we give tours. We had Jake Bruton, who does a lot with the Build Show. He came by and got pretty excited just to kind of see how it all comes together and, what all of those steps are before a fan goes out the door.
It's really quite impressive. Like it's a thing. It's a big, huge thing. Living, breathing, thumping monster banging away. It's not something that you dreamed up, over a long weekend.
Yeah, and it's like now that's kind of mostly automated and everything. Like back in the days when you're like hand entering all the values into Excel and calculating all the fits and everything by hand and everything. It's amazing to see this all just the automation and the robotics that's involved with it now, opening and closing actuators automatically and things like that. So,
you got that working, did you?
And now you can even there's a QR code right on the fan now. You can scan that with your phone and it brings up the live certificate for it on your phone or tablet. You can show anybody anytime. So it's amazing how it's all kind of come full circle, really.
Are the fans pretty consistent, like from one to the next? How often do you get one that's like totally haywire?
Not that often, really. Usually there's just something else that's kind of going on that's making it kind of act up or whatnot. But for the majority, they all kind of fit that global fit, really.
Colin, you still have your boat?
Boat is gone. I know people often ask, "What? Did you buy another boat?" Look, I spent 20 years living on a boat. My total cost of living there was $750 a month. Everything: power, dockage, storage, bicycle, clothes dryer, the whole 9 yards. So it was a really super economical place for me to live, right in the middle of the city. So, how could I move?
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of investigating New Zealand bush and rocks, it's certainly one of the most diverse places on the planet in terms of geology, plants, birds, all that kind of stuff. You guys should come here, even if you only come for a week. It's the most amazing place on the planet.
You don't have to slip there then either anymore, huh? You had to give up that beautiful slip.
One thing I noticed is when you spend a lot of time doing the same thing, time starts to pass really fast. Time is kind of relative to change. So the more change you have, the more time slows down. So it seems like those 20 years just went by in a blink.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm back to I move every year plan.
Nice. Okay. And that's where you're originally from, New Zealand, right?
I was born on the South Island of Christchurch, so we came to Canada when I was 8. I'm basically a Canadian. I probably spend like 5-6 hours a day just reading about disruptive tech. I probably read 20,000 articles on Tesla alone. So I know it really well. I wish that the CEO was as stable as the product was. He seems to be just kind of going off the deep end lately, just with the most absurd crap imaginable. But I mean, the product he's the world leader in like 4 or 5 disruptive technologies. Like,
man,
I mean, he is by far the most brilliant industrialist that's ever existed. Like, you could put any 3 industrialists together, Edison and Ford and so on, and he's better than all those guys put together. The guy is just like so amazing.
It's unfortunate that the politics and the rest of the antics kind of take away from that. It's how cool the product is. And anytime you see one of those rockets coming back and landing itself down on the floating pad out in the ocean, whatever, you're thinking, man, doing something right there.
Well, when you consider that a consortium of Boeing, Grumman, and all of the NASA scientists together got 50% more than SpaceX did, now they've had one successful launch and they put some guys into the space station, they can't get them back. Meanwhile, he's got like 100 launches, and now it's like 60% of the global launches are SpaceX. Like, what?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Like, reading the story of his development of the Raptor engine is just inspiring.
Yeah.
And like, after they get it perfected, he says, guess what? We're going to start over again. They go, what? Yeah, we're going to start all over. We're going to do it all over again.
That's where the insanity comes in, where everyone like, no, we just finished.
You know, he recognizes that if it's possible to produce a better rocket engine, it's long term, it's the way to go.
Yeah.
Because it's all about how much weight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cost for the payload.
He's able to put changes on his production line in 6 hours. It takes Volkswagen 3 to 4 years to make a change. Like, why are they behind? Well, because of that.
From everything that you've learned over the years, from when you founded RetroTech and to now, I mean, is there any key advice that you would just give the building science industry as a whole?
Well, I think my first thought is that an unusual era in human history where we will see more change in the next 10 years than we've experienced in the last 10,000. And mostly it's going to come around things like AI and energy systems that are the essential wealth and the currency of human existence, those two things. And they also dictate politics. So I'm really interested to see what will happen when you guys finally get past your November election, for God's sake. Just get back to some kind of normalcy. And then, hopefully eventually get the thing straightened out in Ukraine and, and get these goddamn authoritarians. Jet landed in some island in the Caribbean and the American government seized it. So, I mean, that's a good start, like, get rid of these damn authoritarians, and get some people in there who care. All these things are linked, like the technology and politics are actually linked, which is kind of interesting to know that. There are very few people have the time to look into it. Certainly listening to Lex Feldman's podcast and so on is useful to kind of to get a bit of a window into that, or just following Tesla. Tesla Ultra Bulls, I think, is one of the podcasts I listen to. That gives you a really good glimpse into where things are going, because I think Tesla for sure is the technological leader in a lot of different areas. The other thing is that people view something like AI with a sense of panic and fear. Oh, it's going to take over, and these robots are going to be raping us and eating our children, and oh my God. But the thing is that if we understand technology, we can get it to work for us. Like, for example, I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now is misinformation, a fire hose of misinformation on every important topic. AI is capable of analyzing anything anyone says in real time and telling you how much of it's BS and how much of it's real. Understanding that is really important. That when you consider the conspiracy theories travel like 100 times faster than the truth, which is kind of boring, dull, and uninteresting, and so forth. I think those are the things that we really have to concern ourselves with. So interestingly, the intersection of technology, energy, and so on, which we're kind of part of that picture. So I think that's pretty cool. It's cool to be a participant in the humanity's future, and we are.
Get an opportunity to use AI and kind of my day-to-day work and stuff, doing programming, things like that. It is really exciting. There is a kind of concern about the fact that it has a significant carbon footprint for all the computing power behind it and everything like that. But still, though, I think it may still be worth it at the end of the day.
I have heard a lot about that whole carbon footprint thing. I don't think that large language models are as important as real world AI. So by real world AI, I mean, say Optimus robot, full self-driving, things like that, where you could get a car to be maybe 10, 100 times safer than a human and so forth. I think that's a real advance. So if we can do it there, we can do it in other areas. There's so many things that could be done. It would be like transitioning from where 90% of the population worked on farms, and now it's less than 1%, right? Yeah. So everybody, what about the jobs? Well, what about the 89% of the farm jobs lost? We seem to tolerate that just fine. I don't think it's a matter of jobs. It's a matter of understanding the technology and using it appropriately, which means clear thinking.
It's like sometimes they're not lost jobs. They just transferred from one industry to another, or, people get hung up on that a little bit too much.
There's all kinds of jobs that aren't being done. Like even if you look at, say, elementary school class sizes are too large, that are going to be inspirational to kids. They're going to teach them how to be human. I think that's really important. And you do that with face-to-face contact.
Yeah, well, I definitely appreciate, all the things that you've taught me over the years and the opportunity to work here at RetroTech and the position that I'm in now, and appreciate you taking the time today and everything to do this with us. And I suspect actually we'll probably have to invite you back for, special topics here and there or whatnot.
Yeah, one question here about the best memories. Some of my best memories is playing poker with Ben and Darren. But the other thing is like the fact that we still have a lot of people at RetroTech that have been there for 20 years. And I'm really proud of that. The fact that they have, we've been able to offer them a worthwhile job for that length of time and to get really good at what they're doing.
They want to stay there. I mean, that says a lot about the company too.
A big shout out to both Ben and Darren, who I think are amazing humanitarian and logistical managers. I would love to work for either of you guys.
We'll have to put a contract together.
Other good memory is what I say, waving goodbye to my desk.
I think it's worth mentioning too is that, your brother Chris worked here for a really long time and contributed quite a bit to the company and oversaw the production here and was a true joy to work with here and everything. And I think that it's just worth mentioning him here as well.
My other brother, Greg, worked for a while. It was, a little bit more troublesome, shall we say. Kind of like opposite personalities from, very introverted to extroverted and so forth. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Colin. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Nice chatting with you guys.
Yeah. Good catching up, Colin.